So ever since Nintendo officially confirmed support for N64 library of games for Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack, there has been a lot of talk and discourse online amongst fans wondering how far Nintendo will go with their classic library of games support for the service. And in today's video, I want to walk down memory lane together, boot up the Nintendo Wii, which is a very iconic and unique system in Nintendo's history, share some of my all-time favorite memories of this console, and have that large final discussion on whether or not we can ever expect the Nintendo Wii library of games to be added to Nintendo Switch Online in the future. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. Now, as I mentioned, guys, we are walking down memory lane together today, and I'm super pumped to make this video because I do have some very nostalgic memories from the Wii era of gaming. You kind of had an interesting menu layout before we do just hop in and boot this up. Everything was a channel, so you had like even a forecast channel for your weather, you had news, internet channel, Wii Shop channel, of course, photo channel, you have a Mario Kart Wii channel, and then obviously you could have like your virtual console games spread out over the menu system however you would like. Just a funny concept that they utilized in this Wii era of gaming, and it's hard to believe that we're past the 15-year point of this console being sold and available on the market, but it was out in the US in November of 2006, so it has been quite some time since we've had this console initially released. And the nice thing about Nintendo consoles, really all the way up till the Switch for the most part, is that you would have basically two consoles in one with the backwards compatibility factor. This literally has at least the initial Wii versions, which I know they discontinued in the future, but they have a GameCube fully baked into this with the controller ports supported, and then you even have, of course, the memory card slots. It's literally a backwards compatible GameCube, in addition to it being its entire own home console with, of course, the big motion iconic Wiimote motion controller based gimmick that they had, which I'm not the biggest fan of, to be transparent, but there still were some super quality titles that we're going to boot up and go over today. And it's one that's fun to look back at and also have that conversation of, could this come to Nintendo Switch Online? Because from the motion standpoint of things, it definitely can. We see things like the gyro aiming being so accurate with the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons that with the reworking ability of, you know, having to obviously do some tweaks to get the titles to run, you could remap those same kind of motion controls to the controller nunchuck combo that we had in the Wii era of gaming. Now, we'll quickly transition into some gameplay, so I'm not only talking through the title screen of Twilight Princess, but there's some interesting history of the games we're going to walk through, and then also revisit that conversation of when, if at all, we could expect these type of games to come over. Now, we are fairly early into a Twilight Princess playthrough on a file that I never went back and fully completed. Now, you could kind of call this the testing ground for motion controls in a Zelda game, as Skyward Sword, of course, was the second title released in the Zelda franchise on the Wii that had Wii Motion Plus, which definitely did more of the accurate sword motion swing, whereas this is kind of like directional based, but you're more or less just pressing the B button with your swing on this as opposed to having it assigned to a button. So while it is motion, it's also not the most accurate. And then a lot of the gimmick being around all of your items, of course, that you are going to do that point and aim motion in order to actually unleash them. There is also some interesting button mechanics here because you have items assigned to really just the B button, but you can pull them out using the D-pad. So it's a different button layout. Like for me, this never felt near as natural as the GameCube version. Not just for the fact that I'm not the biggest fan of, you know, force motion controls, but really the fact that this game felt designed for button controls in mind, because of course it was. Then it just ended up taking so long, as Zelda games typically do in development, that they decided to, well, why not release this on the, of course, successor to the GameCube, which was ultimately the Wii. And this game, let me tell you, has quite the history of delays and pushbacks, and then even ultimately a full year delay that it did take. And in addition, this is probably just doing that same thing, or no, I did need to do this. In addition to you know, waiting for the initial delay, you have a full year delay to make sure it's actually able to come out on the brand new Nintendo console as a launch title, which Nintendo is known to launch new hardware and Zelda games quite regularly throughout history. So that's where a lot of those, you know, rumor mill speculation talk pop up when we talk about games like Breath of the Wild 2 getting pushed back to spring of 2023. And does that correlate with hardware at all? Maybe not, but also you have to kind of sometimes ask that question because Nintendo has been known for doing things like that in the past. Now, Twilight Princess is ultimately one that I hope we don't have to wait to talk about this game coming to NSO in order to play it again. I'm a firm believer, and you guys should know by the channel by now, that I'm still holding out some level of hope. While it has dwindled more over time, as a lot of the insiders claiming that these games would be coming to the Switch, we still have yet to see that happen. However, I do still hold out some hope that the HD versions of these titles will be the ones that ultimately make it over, and that's certainly how I would prefer to play these games in the modern era, as opposed to going back and playing their original versions on both the GameCube and the Wii, like we have here. And definitely out of the two, in addition to the difference with motion controls, the other thing that's kind of interesting with the game is that they had to actually do a full-on mirror mode flip, because if you guys aren't familiar, Link is historically always left-handed in video games, and of course the masses of populations are typically right-handed. At least, you know, not saying there's not left-handed people out there, there are plenty, but that's basically the smaller group of people are left-handed than right-handed. So Nintendo felt the need to, of course, design everything around the sword being in the right hand, causing them to ultimately have to mirror mode this game in order to essentially bring it over correctly to the Wii. So one that's the first true up Zelda motion control game out there, period, and one that's not, you know, pinpoint accurate. I can't slightly move my wrist around to swing. I have to just do a swing motion, and it's like hitting the button. And I think that's part of the reason why I had a little bit of a disconnect with this game. And definitely, I didn't get the Wii right at the launch year anyway. I got it about a year after launch. It was literally impossible to find when it was originally out. And so, you know, I replayed this game probably 10-15 times on the GameCube version before ever going through the Wii version of it, causing a lot of my nostalgia factor to lie with the GameCube version. And then ultimately, you know, the HD re-release on the Wii U, which is what I'm hoping we are going to get brought over to the Switch. But one that if we do ever see Wii games brought to Nintendo Switch Online plus expansion pack, which, to be clear and get this out of the way right now, I definitely think that's a further off addition. I think they can live quite a while with the N64 and with the Game Boy Advance family of systems and the Game Boy family of systems, and then even turn into things like the GameCube before they go to the Wii. But I do ultimately hope that we see them bring that broad library of consoles over, so we have, you know, the full gameplay experiences for all the different eras of Nintendo on one home console slash portable console. I think that's absolutely what you want to do with the service long term. Now we'll quickly hop into the next game so we can get through a few more on our list today. But before we do that, I feel like I need to take some time for personal development and brush up on some of my skills, which brings us to today's video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of online classes and members across 150 countries who come together to find inspiration and take the next step in their creative journey. Learning a specific skill can be very challenging, especially if you're new to it. However, Skillshare makes it super easy with many classes that are designed to get you engaged right away. I'm always trying to step up my YouTube game and get more familiar with different video editing techniques, and following these different courses have made my editing experience far more streamlined, fast, and efficient. There are even classes from very popular creators who have an established reputation in the industry. I've personally really been enjoying the YouTube Success series with MKBHD, who I've been following and watching for years. Also, the Discussions tab is a great feature on Skillshare, allowing you to talk back and forth with other users and even ask questions. The first 1,000 people to use the link below in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Take advantage of the free trial and start learning a new skill today. Huge thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Now, next up on our list, you have none other than Donkey Kong Country Returns, which is quite honestly a true return to form for the series, as you had the iterations of course, Donkey Kong 64 going to the first 3D adventure style game. Then we had a kind of interesting interesting breakaway with the Donkey Kong Jungle Beat games in the GameCube era and things. And then finally into the Wii's life cycle, we did get this return to Donkey Kong Country style 2D platformers type experiences, which of course you'll obviously notice is extremely similar to what you will get with something like a Tropical Freeze. And this is one that's super enjoyable for me and that I would love to see brought over as something like part of a classic library of games collection for Nintendo Switch Online. Now, to quickly get more into kind of the conversation of will Nintendo actually do something like Nintendo Switch Online and Wii games, it's like, yes and no. I definitely think that if there was ever a generation to have them bring it over, the Switch generation is it, but I can also see them really playing the long game with the subscription service, as now even with things like their online account system, it is something that's able to be brought over towards cross-generational iterations of Nintendo systems for the first time, as previously you pretty much had to sign up with a brand new eShop, or you had to sign up with a brand new entirely new account from kind of that Wii U, really the Wii U being the last one where I guess you have to do that. Now this Nintendo account formula actually is claimed to be directly from Nintendo's president himself, cross-generational, I guess you could call it, or really just it's a platform that is its own thing that they can roll forward, meaning I would expect things like Nintendo Switch Online to kind of come along with that and have it span multiple generations of consoles, as opposed to it just being like, oh, well, we tried Nintendo Switch Online for the Switch era, and then whenever we go to the Switch 2 or Super Nintendo Switch or whatever the future console, true next-gen console may be called, as opposed to, you know, having that clean, hard break, I do think that this is the time that we just see them essentially roll forward with what they have right now and just take it into the next step and to the next era. And so I think you ultimately, far down the line, you do get systems like the GameCube starting out, and then a couple years into maybe something like the next generation Switch console's life cycle, we could be talking about things like the Wii library of games with, you know, obviously all of the first party Nintendo games being like the easy editions, but you know, besides those, I'm sure they can do some licensing fees and get some of the great third-party stuff that's on there as well. If you really start to talk about Nintendo bringing in their entire library of iconic franchises to a subscription service, like the price can not only be high, but it can honestly be justified if the right library of games is there. And I think something like the Wii library of games on the Nintendo Switch would be a huge win. I also think that, you know, it'll be interesting to see how Nintendo handles a transition like that, where yes, you can do it with the Joy-Cons as we mentioned, but then you do have to have that conversation that effectively takes out the Switch Lite of the conversation for that library of games. And I don't know if Nintendo will quite want to fragment it like that, or if they do some kind of emulated motion control with button layout options. So, you know, all of that will have to remain to be seen. And if I'm just setting my expectations for a timeline of when I would expect something like the Wii library of games, I'm going to say far into whatever Nintendo has planned for their true next generation console, and not anything in terms of you know, an around the corner release. I definitely don't think it's going to be like we get Game Boy this year and then GameCube next year and then the Wii the year after. That would be fantastic in a perfect world, but knowing Nintendo and how they tend to drip feed their announcements and libraries and of games that they support and different things like that, I definitely think that that's the soonest we could expect something like Wii coming to NSO. But with that transition, we'll go ahead and hop into the next game on today's list. Now, finally, we have Metroid Other M closing out our list of games that I would be hopeful to see make it to Nintendo Switch Online one day. And boy, when you bring up this game, do you get a lot of divided opinions, because out of most mainline 3D Metroid games, this definitely has the one I would say is the one that the fans would argue is maybe a misstep for Metroid in terms of the gameplay overall in the series, maybe even some story elements that have people very upset around it. Very unique controls on this one here, because of course you have the ability to go first person mode whenever you point at the screen, and you almost have that Metroid Prime look to it, but then the minute you put your Wiimote back sideways to play with the traditional button style controls, you get a third person action platformer type of deal. So it's one of those for me that I never went back and played this game after initially completing it, and I don't have Wow, that was a lot of health that I did not want to lose there. And I don't have the most nostalgia for this title. Granted, as I've become nothing but even more of a Metroid fan over the years, I personally would like to give this one a big second chance. I just think it's one that I never really gave a fair shake to the first time around. And while you can argue that maybe it was a misstep for the series in a lot of ways, there's still some really unique story elements to this game and fun action combat sections, to be fair, as you know, outside of it just being tied to the Wiimote, which kind of feels awkward to play sideways to begin with, it's still an enjoyable gameplay experience for what it is. And I really think that if you took this to something like a Pro Controller layout with maybe the gyro aiming and a button to trigger the first person transition, I think it may fare a lot better than it did the first time around. And I'd be curious to see how Metroid fans would ultimately adapt to this game, or even if they would give it a second chance, you know, if brought back to something like Nintendo Switch Online. And definitely cool action sequences like that as well. Like, it's not a bad game by any means. I think it was just not what people were expecting, especially off the heels of what we saw them do with Prime 1 through 3, which shout outs, hopefully, you know, as opposed to booting up Prime 3 on the Wii, which is obviously a huge game for me personally, and one that I definitely hope we see come back. I hope that we are around the corner from that long rumored Metroid Prime 1 remake. And if we have to buy them all individually, we have to buy them all individually. That's sounding more like what it'll be. If I have Metroid Prime games to play while I am waiting for Prime 4 to ultimately come out, I will be more than happy. And so I just think that this is one that, you know, you have a lot of interesting iterations on the Wii that I don't think were always well received at the time, that nowadays may be a lot better received. So with that, we'll go ahead and end the video here. We'll get back to the main menu so we can hear some Wii classic menu music while we're talking about what I want to hear from you guys. But definitely a nostalgic console, one that I think absolutely deserves to live on in the modern era, and one that I hope doesn't get left behind because of the motion control side of things, where you have games like Skyward Sword HD that were clearly a massive project to pull off and bring over with traditional button controls. And will we ever see Nintendo support motion but just attach it to the gyro aiming in the Switch Joy-Cons? I am hopeful that answer is yes. I want to hear from you guys at this point in the video, all your personal thoughts and nostalgia around the Wii era of gaming. Were you a fan of the motion-based controls, and do you like to see Nintendo do games with more motion in them? Or are you kind of like me and you do, you know, have a harder time getting into some of those games, but still think that there are absolutely quality titles on here that need to be brought over? And do you think Nintendo will ever actually entertain the idea of bringing their Wii library of games to Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack? Do you think it's further off into the future, like a Switch 2 or Switch successor like I do? Or do you think it's something that Nintendo will accelerate this service, and every year we get some kind of major console, and we may only be a year or two away from an official reveal for something like the Wii library of games? So regardless of all your thoughts and opinions on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around this topic. Go watch yesterday's video next if you haven't already, where I'm not sure what the title of that was because I pre-recorded this video a few days in advance. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.